Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the honourable colleague from Coast Bay Central Notre Dame for his great speech today, but as well for hosting us on our Parliamentary Committee, Fisheries Committee tour that we did last week, where we and myself and others on the committee toured Newfoundland, Labrador, and beautiful St. John's, Gander, as well as in Miramichi in New Brunswick. And I rise in the House today, it's an honour to rise in the House today, to speak to Bill S-208, an act respecting the National Seal Products Day. Bill S-208 would mark May 20th as National Seal Products Day each year. This would allow for the celebration of Canada's rich heritage, where for hundreds of years our Indigenous peoples and coastal communities have respected the seal harvest in order to maintain healthy wildlife populations and deep cultural traditions. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party is the only major federal political party to explicitly state its support for the seal harvest in its official policy declaration. For my colleagues on all sides, let me just reiterate this policy. We believe the government must continue to support the Canadian sealing industry by working to eliminate unfair international trade bans on Canadian seal products, end quote. The Conservative statement of support has been in the party's policy declaration since it was adopted at the party's very first policy conference in Montreal in 2005. And this policy has been featured in virtually every party platform since that time. But this is not merely a symbolic gesture, Mr. Speaker. The previous Conservative government pursued legal challenges at the WTO and in the European Court of Justice against the European Union ban on seal products. In fact, our previous government invested millions in the promotion of seal products and the opening of new markets for these products, as our honourable colleague had mentioned earlier. Mr. Speaker, the seal harvest goes beyond just wildlife management. Archaeological evidence suggests that Native Americans and First Nations peoples have been hunting seals for thousands of years. Seal meat was and is today an important source of fat, protein, and vitamins. And seal products hold significant cultural and traditional values to northern communities and our First Nations. In fact, not only does seal meat help meet dietary needs, seal pelts were also vital for warmth when it came to long, cold winters. And, Mr. Speaker, as was mentioned earlier and a couple times today, they make great ties as well, too. Mr. Speaker, although much has changed in the 21st century, the fact remains that sealing is still very much an important source of revenue for Inuit and northern communities. Thousands of Canadian families and remote coastal communities depend on the seal hunt as a source of income and food. Sealing in Nunavut alone represents between 4 million and 6 million of food source each year. And before the European Union placed an unfair ban on sealing, the income from seal pelts generate close to $1 million annually. But seals are not just used for their fur, Mr. Speaker. As mentioned earlier, seal oil can be used for its omega-3 oils, which have been sold in capsule formula in Europe, Asia, and Canada for over 10 years. This is significant, Mr. Speaker, especially for northern communities that are often limited in the commodities they are able to produce, commodities they are able to sell. Sealing has generated part-time employment for thousands of people, Mr. Speaker. A conservative estimate puts the value of the hunt at $35 to $40 million annually. Unfortunately, though, anti-sealing campaigns have severely damaged markets for seal products. Rural economies, such as Newfoundland, Labrador, and parts of the maritime provinces, are already fragile, and they have been further weakened as a result. Just last week, as the Fisheries and Oceans Parliamentary Committee conducted our tour in Newfoundland, Labrador, and New Brunswick, we heard testimony from Chief George Ganesh of the Eel Ground First Nations, how their communities lived and relied on the lands and waters and the resources for their way of life. Their fishery was very much a matter of the physical, cultural, and spiritual survival of their communities. But because of the downfall of the Atlantic salmon and conditions outside their control, we heard how 5 of their communities are now amongst the 10 poorest in Canada, and how a commercial seal harvest could provide and boost their local economy, how it would raise their community. Sealing is an important cultural and economic driver in Canada's eastern, Arctic, and northern communities. It is a long-standing and integral part of Canada's rural culture and a way of life for thousands of Canadians. Indigenous peoples in Canada have a constitutionally protected right to harvest marine mammals, including seals, as long as the harvest is consistent with conservation needs and other requirements. Promoting the sealing industry by recognizing National Seal Products Day will have a positive impact on the promotion and education of Canadians and indeed the world on this important industry day. During our visits last week, we heard of generational loss of culture in our fishing communities. Mr. Speaker, as you know, I come from the beautiful Cariboo, and we see this as well with our farming communities. We are losing that next generation of farmers. And our traditional sport of rodeo is increasingly coming under fire from those that don't understand the sport and are using their celebrity way or their celebrity role against it. We have to do everything we can to promote our long-standing traditional industries, share and teach the culture and traditions that are unique to each industry before it is lost. And Mr. Speaker, we need to celebrate these industries, engaging and educating our community, our nation, and indeed the world along the way. That Canada's seal hunt is humane, that it is well managed, that there are rigorous checks and balances in place, ensuring that the seal hunt is in compliance with animal welfare principles that are internationally recognized. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, we know the seal hunt is sustainable in the long term. The Atlantic harp seal population is in good shape. As we heard earlier today, it is in the millions and has more than tripled in size since the 1970s. Aerial patrols, vessel monitoring systems, at-sea and dockside vessel inspections, and processing facility inspections, they all ensure that the Canadian seal hunt is ethical and in compliance. And the amount of seals harvested are always within the number established by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans as a total allowable catch. In fact, Mr. Speaker, if I could point to one example, the quota from 2011 was 335,000 seals. Only 40,000 was taken. Mr. Speaker, there will always be vocal opposition to about the seal hunt from celebrities and animal rights activists. However, it's our job as parliamentarians to disseminate the facts from the fiction. I have a quote from Dennis Longuepie, a sealer in Quebec. In Canada's remote coastal and northern communities, sealing is an important part of life, a much-needed source of income for thousands of families. The revenues generated from the activity are integral and vital component of the annual income earned by the sealers. Mr. Speaker, let's embrace sealing as a rich part of Canadian history and a part of an essential way of life for many. Again, the promotion of the seal industry will help bring facts to the table, educate, and possibly provide well-meaning economic impact to those in our northern and Indigenous communities. It will have a positive impact on the promotion and education of the Canadians on this important industry. I'll probably be supporting Bill S-208, and I hope all of my honourable colleagues will join me in doing so. Thank you.